You'd listen to whatever was on the radio because the radio was the main thing in those days. First music I can remember hearing as guitar-oriented music was Jimmy Rogers, the singing brakeman.
Well, there was no such thing as an English record. You know? I think the first English record that was anywhere near anything was Move It by Cliff Richard. And before that, there'd been nothing.
Well, in England, in sort of 58, this big craze came out called skiffle, which was based on like American bottle parties, like blues bottle parties, you know, where you'd take a washboard into the house and a bottle of beer would be open house. And I believe that people just like pay a quarter or a dime to, it would pay the rent parties. And so you'd have someone with a jug and a washboard and a tea-chest bass, you know, or an oil drum with a stick and a string, and someone would have a guitar. Yeah. It'd be like made-up instruments, you know?
As I became a teenager, I was about 12 or 13 when I first heard Fats Domino, I'm in Love Again. That was the first, I think, what I would call the first rock and roll record I ever heard.
There's Lonnie Donegan and the Vipers and people like that were scuffle groups in England.
Rock and roll meant it was real. Everything else was unreal. To me, it got through. It was the only thing to get through to me out of all the things that were happening when I was 15.
Whatever record was being played, you'd try and listen to it. You know, you couldn't even get a cup of sugar, let alone a rock and roll record.
Yeah, there was Hey Lily Low, Rock Island Line, was a mighty good road. You know, all those types of things. Country folk blues, you know, if you can dig that.
When I went to art school, I was at art school for 5 years. When I went to, this was sort of college, you know, I went in there, they would only allow jazz to be played. You know, they wouldn't allow rock and roll in. It was frowned upon those days. So we had to con them into letting us play rock and roll there on the record player by calling it blues, you know.
Lonnie Donegan was the other big influence. That's what made all the kids buy guitars at the time. Cliff and the Shadows and Lonnie were the sort of the nationwide ones.
Gene Autry was the most. Go and have a look in my bedroom. It's covered with Gene Autry posters and pictures. He was my first musical influence. He sent shivers down my spine when he put his leg over the horn on the saddle and sang South of the Border, Down Mexico Way in a movie, right? Well, I was into it before. I never had records or anything, but I'd go to the movies all the time, right? On Champion, he sang South of the Border. He had 3 guys behind him, Mexicans, going, ay, 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 ay. And I was going, oh, look at him. And he's playing. He's got his leg over the, you know, the horn of the saddle thing. And he's singing this song, man. It freaked me out. It's my I don't even know what age I was. Probably 8. It must have been in between hospitals. It was fantastic. I loved it. And that sticks in my brain. My first musical experience was that. I mean, I'd heard music before, but that one is my biggie. Then I got it. Johnny Ray, you know, and Perry Como and all them, you know, they were around in sort of 54-ish. But Bill Haley was out in 54. When Johnny Ray played Liverpool, he sat on top of the Adelphi Hotel and waved. And I'm there saying, oh, he's waving at me. Look at that. Hi, Johnny.
We got to hear people like Bill Brunsey. I think he might have even done a tour of England.
I was a big fan of his, and actually Frankie Lane.
I loved Carl Perkins.
Bebopaloola by Gene Vincent, which was the first record I ever bought. So it's a sort of special record for me. He sang it in a film called The Girl Can't Help It. And it was always a big favourite of mine. We got to meet Gene later when we were in Hamburg. But as I say, the first record I ever bought, big impression. At the time, those are the things that kind of just made tingles up my spine, you know. To me, it seemed like a whole new direction of music. Pretty respectable people had been singing up until then. But then there was all these people in kind of crazy clothes and sort of guitars and stuff and slick back hair.
When I was 16, Elvis is what was happening. A guy with long, greasy hair, wiggling his ass and singing Hound Dog and That's All Right Mama on those early Sun records, which I think are his great period.
Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. To me, that sort of takes me back to when I was first buying records. Up until that point, it had been sort of Billy Cotton and swing and bebop and stuff, but suddenly rock and roll kind of burst on the scene. And Elvis was one of the first people that kind of really made me take an interest. And I remember being at school when this record came out. And somebody had a picture in one of the musical papers of Elvis. I think it was an advert for Heartbreak Hotel. And I just looked at it and just thought, he's just so good looking. He just looked perfect. That's him. That is the guru we have been waiting for. The Messiah has arrived. Definitely there's about 20 Elvis records. I mean, I Was the One Night, Don't Be Cruel, All Shook Up. All of those are equal favourites, really. Jailhouse Rock, equal favourites to Heartbreak Hotel.
For me personally, you know, I liked all his rock stuff. All his early stuff was amazing. Then he did that first movie, Love Me Tender. Yeah. That was great. And then after that, it went downhill. Jailhouse Rock was good. Yeah, so Jailhouse Rock. After Jailhouse Rock, it went downhill for me.
One of our favourite records around that time was one called Searching by the Coasters. Now, this is one we used to do at the Cavern with the Beatles, and we used to have little groups of fans who used to give themselves little names. There used to be a group of fans called the Cement Mixers, with some other group called the Wooden Tops. And they just make up little names for themselves, you know, being a little gang. And there was two girls called Chris and Val, and they used to say, "Sing Searching, Paul, sing Searching." That used to be the big request from Chris and Val, "Sing Searching." So we always used to do this one. It used to be a big request, and it was a big favourite with the group, by the Coasters. There were lots of people coming up then, and one of them was Buddy Holly. We loved his vocal sound and we loved his guitar playing, but most of all, I think, was the fact that he actually wrote the stuff himself. That's what turned us on. Suddenly, here was a rock and roll hero who had glasses.
You know, you went to see those movies with Elvis or somebody in it when we were still in Liverpool, and you'd see everybody waiting to see him, right? And I'd be waiting there too. And they'd all scream when he came on the screen, right? So we thought, that's a good job.
So when Girl Can't Help It came along, instead of us looking at these old black and white movies and thinking, there's Clyde McPhatter, there's Fats Domino, people we loved who were being treated quite shabbily, suddenly this was in colour and this was in widescreen, and you cut to Jane Mansfield, and that's it, the game's over.
I went to see Rock Around the Clock in the Isle of Man. My grandparents took me there after I came out of hospital. And it was just sensational because they ripped up the cinema. And this was good for me to see.
I had no idea about doing music as a way of life until rock and roll hit me. And then when rock and roll hit me, that changed my whole life.
And then when I was 16, I re-established a relationship with my mother for about 4 years. She taught me music. She first of all taught me the banjo, and from that I progressed to guitar. The first song I learned was Ain't That a Shame, an old rock hit, Fats Domino.
Drums were the only thing I wanted. And I came out and I used to look in shops and see drums. That's all I looked at. I never looked at guitars or anything.
When I was 13, 14, I used to be at the back of the class trying to draw guitars. Big cello cutaway guitars with F-holes, little solid ones with pointy cutaways and rounded cutaways. And, you know, I was totally into guitars. And I heard about this kid who had a guitar, and it was £3.10. It was just a little acoustic, round hole type guitar. And I got the £3.10 off my mother. That was a lot of money in those days.
It's a joke in the family. Guitar's all right for a hobby, but it won't earn you any money.
And so I was in hospital, and I used to play on the cupboard next to me with these cotton bobbins, big long bobbins. And I'd always be tapping. It just seemed to be my thing. Then I made a kit out of biscuit tins, you know. And then I bought a bass drum. The first drum I ever had was just this, because $4, this monster old bass drum with one skin. So when we'd have a party at our house, you know, and we'd have the man from over there play banjo, someone else would play harmonica or something, there'd always be a sing-song. There were always sing-song parties, you know, more than records. Everyone sang a song, you know, and it'd all be, you know, oh, I do like to be beside the seaside, you know, it'd be all those songs. So I'd get me drum out, and of course they'd say, oh, it's the kid, you know, they'd let your ABBA go, you know, here comes the kid with his drum kit, look out. So I was 15, and so I'd bang this thing with 2 pieces of firewood for a while, then they'd get rid of me. Okay, get him off, and they'd send me out, you know, get rid of the drum. So I got rid of that.
My dad used to be a trumpet player himself, and for my birthday, he once bought me a trumpet from Rushworth and Draper's, one of the music stores in Liverpool. Yeah, he used to bang about. He had a little band of his own called Jim Mack's Band, because he'd been a trumpeter till his teeth gave out and he got false teeth and he had to give up doing the trumpet. He was a trumpet and pianist, and so he bought me a trumpet because I was just at the end of that thing. You know, there was a big fad there where everyone wanted to be a trumpeter. But I suddenly figured out that I wouldn't be able to sing with this thing stuck in my mouth. So I thought, well, I've got to do something about this. I went back to the shop and traded it in for a guitar, which I've still got, the guitar. It's a Zenith, first guitar I ever had. And then I took it home and I couldn't play it at all, couldn't even begin to play it. And then I worked out it was because I was left-handed and the guitar wasn't. So I strung it the other way around, and then I was able to.
And then a friend of my father's, or my stepfather, Harry, in Romford, he was selling this kit for £10, man. And he went down to visit his folks for Christmas, and then he came back with this kit, which was amazing. There's drums. There was, you know, not a drum. There was drums. There was a snare and a bass drum and a hi-hat and one little tom-tom and a top cymbal, right? And a bass drum pedal. You don't have to kick it anymore. You know? So I set it off in my bedroom, you know, I the back bedroom, set it all up. Yeah. So off I go. Boom, back, boom, you know, load of crap. So you'd hear from the bottom of the stairs, "Keep the noise down, the neighbors are complaining." So I only ever did it twice, and I got shouted at both times, because, you know, it was a lot of noise, especially when you can't play. It's not, you know, drums aren't that musical at the best of times for playing melodies, you know, but it wasn't like a great solo, you know, with something interesting. It was just this mad thing hitting drums. So I never practiced. You know, I stopped it then, and I got into a band. It was the only way I could practice, was to join a group. So I practiced with every group in Liverpool, and that's how and I've done that ever since. I've never sat in a room and played the drums.
He was doing a song by the Del Vikings called "Come Go With Me."
After the show, I saw he had talent, and he was playing guitar backstage and doing 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran.
I said, "Well, I've got this friend who's really good, you know."
Yeah, Paul and I used to just kind of get together, played a bit, but we were just schoolboys then.
And they said, "Well, yeah, like what?" You know, I said, "Well, he can play raunchy perfectly. Down, 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 down." And we all love that song. So we said, "Well, gotta try him out."
When I was with Rory, the Beatles were nothing. They weren't even formed, you know. Then we went to Germany, and that's where I met the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And that's why it ties up with Rory. We played one club, and they were playing in another club. And we knew them, hello, that's all. We didn't, you know them. It was just, oh, hi, you know, from Liverpool, in about hi. So I used to get drunk. And I like sad songs when I'm drunk, you know. That's why I like country, I think.
And he'd come to our club real late at night, and he used to like the sort of blues feel of the late night sessions when there was hardly anybody there.
And demanding they play slow songs.
I'd end up, if they had the last set, I'd be sitting there saying, you know, play so-and-so, which is like this slow songs all the time. Yeah, I want a slow song, brother. One great one of Elvis's that was really slow that they used to do.
And we were getting down. I can see what he liked about it. You know, we were playing stuff a bit more for ourselves by that time of night, particularly because there was no one in. And this was all sort of bluesy. This was like B-sides and lesser-known tracks. So a thing we used to do, that his particular favourite, he always used to request it.
First thing we ever recorded was That'll Be the Day, Buddy Holly song, and one of Paul's called In Spite of All the Danger. And somewhere, it might be around, it's in Liverpool, some of that record. That's the actual first recording we ever made.